Okay, not recording. So uh, for everyone's context, I'll copy and paste this to the chat. This is the issue. Whoops. This is the issue that we're looking at. I think so. The idea here is to see the epic relationships. Right now, we already have on the sidebar the tree. So you can see the ancestors. Is there a limit to that ancestor tree or not?
We have a limit of, I believe, 4 descendants per epic. So you can only ever see 4. No, 3. 4. 3. You can only ever see 3 in the sidebar.
Right. So
there's a number. There's a number. I thought it was 5. So there's a number, but I don't think that matters too much. There's a limit.
There's a design for more ancestors, but right now the limit was so small that we just decided to show them all.
Yeah. So okay. So we can see in the sidebar. So let me see if I can open an epic that has that. Okay. So let me share my screen. Maybe it's better. Okay. So for example, this epic. You can see here in the sidebar that we have 2 ancestors, and what you're saying is that if we have another epic inside of this epic, I would then be able to see 3. No,
you don't see your children in the current implementation, at least.
No, yeah, I'm saying if we were a level deeper, I would see 3.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So we have the ability to see the ancestors here. We have the ability to see the children here, right? Which
descendants? Yep.
Yeah, is the descendants. And what this issue proposes is to have the ability to see the whole tree, or maybe if it's not the whole tree, to see the descendants and all to the issues and also the issues of those epics and basically everything in between.
But not to see the ancestors, right? I think that's what you're trying to clarify, at least, or that's my understanding. This design was not focused to see your ancestors. It's only like one linear. You can see, because by definition of how we define this, you can only ever have one parent. So if you're going upwards, you can only see only the parent of the parent of the parent. But if you're going downward, you can see the splayed out tree.
Yeah, so you would see the descendants here, right? You would have the ability to filter and only see epics or issues. And then here on the sidebar, you would see the ancestors of the current epic that we're looking at. And I'm not very confident about this approach because I'm not sure if seeing the entire tree here is as helpful as seeing the roadmap as well. Or in this case, we would have 2 separate views. We would have the tree, and here the proposal is to then have another view, which is for the roadmap, and possibly in the same way that today you can drag and drop these issues to reorder them, you would likely do the same here in this tree. So you could reorder the issues inside of your descendants, not your ascendants, but only your descendants. And I think this, when you're using something like the from milestone, so you're inheriting the planning that you're doing in the issues, and you're then dragging and dropping those issues between epics, I think you fail to see the big picture of all of this, right? And this is where the roadmap comes in. And my initial proposal was to explore the idea of possibly, instead of having this complex tree inside of the epics, would be to see the whole tree in the roadmap, right? And you would see both things at the same time, and you would be able to compare both views at the same time, instead of having them in separate views. And this is one of the first things that came to mind when I was thinking of this was this could be similar to when you're creating an event in Google Calendar. It allows you to see the events that are coming before and after. But at the same time, when you're planning to find a time somewhere in someone's calendar, you can see the whole, basically the whole calendar of those people as well. So what I'm saying is that having only the descendants tree here, and then having the roadmap separately to that, and then you can see the whole roadmap in another place and the whole tree of the other epics in another place. I think it's like planning in a vacuum, right? I think you're only seeing this in a very narrow way. But then again, this is my assumption, and ultimately what I'd like is for us to do some research on this instead of committing to something as complex as having this roadmap. Or
can I ask a question?
Sure, that's what we're here for.
Yeah, sure. So with your idea of having the tree and the roadmap in the same view, would that mean that if you drag and drop a child epic to reorder it, it would automatically change the view of the roadmap in real time?
Oh, okay. So yeah, from a technical point of view, probably yes. That would be the ideal. Yeah. And what I'm saying is that if you do this here, you don't have that visibility of what this is potentially affecting.
Yeah, I see.
You don't know, because this is here. It's a very detailed view, but you lose the big picture. And this is my assumption, and also looking at what, for example, Jira has with their
other tools have that. You're right.
Yeah, and this is my assumption. Maybe I'm biased somehow, but I would like to see which idea and which solution, which approach could be the best one and performs best with some research instead of going on and implementing this.
Yes, Pedro, I'm never going to say no to research, especially since I've been hearing that UXers should be doing more research individually anyway. So there's no extra work for me, so that's great. But I wanted to comment.
You can be involved in research as well. Anyone can do research.
But the way I've seen it is that they're not mutually exclusive, design-wise, right? I think you would agree, right? Like, I agree. There's obviously some mutually exclusive. Like, what do we build first, right? Should we iterate on a thing that, should we iterate on tree and then update roadmap and then tree and then roadmap and tree and roadmap? So that's one approach, or the other approach is just tree and then come back to roadmap. And I think I think up to now we've been sort of doing the latter, maybe subconsciously, where we've been really just talking a lot about the tree and really haven't really been focused on the roadmap. So I think that's definitely a blind spot. So at least from a design perspective, we should be aware, but maybe not necessarily from a what do we build next perspective. And then so there's at least two use cases I can think of, Pedro, here. And so what customers that I've talked to have been focused on, which makes sense because they don't really use the roadmap yet, or it's not as, the roadmap thing is always harder in my experience with customers because it's very specific. And at GitLab, planning in general and being about knowing when thing is going to, just estimating when projects and work is going to be done. That's always a harder problem to solve in general. And teams do that in a variety of ways. Some teams just don't do that. Like GitLab, we don't really do that, right? If you think about it, right? We just say we're going to ship something and we just move it to the next milestone. So now we're not really good at predictability. And then we even say that in our handbook. So in the customers I've talked to in general for plan and for portfolio management in particular, more people are really caring about right now the work breakdown structure. And they really love the fact that there's multiple levels, but they're annoyed that they can't, number one, add a child right away. And then so we're addressing already. And number two, being able to flexibly move things around because they want to do that. So you're totally right. If they do that, that will affect timelines. But maybe this is the part where UX research I'd love to verify. I'm like 75% sure that most of the use cases right now that customers care about is breaking down the work initially and not worrying about the timelines, because the initial work is about like you having a brand new greenfield concept and breaking down the work into the structure that you care about. And then if GitLab can tell me when things will be delivered because I've entered estimates into the issue, that's also great. And I'll look at that after, but they're not concerned about that when they're moving things around. The fact that, you know, issue A belongs to Epic B and issue C belongs to Epic D, that's not about planning in the time, but it's about logically or semantically, I've split my work this way across these teams, and therefore I want to move things around. So that's why I've been comfortable with just focusing on the tree view, in particular tree view that doesn't have a roadmap in particular.
I wanted to make a point here as well. Like having I get the idea that you're having, and having all of this tree view within the roadmap is like, to me, it's hugely complex and it has a lot of value. But at the same time, like in the roadmap, when you're looking at an epic that has some children, like to me, you'd want to see the immediate children of the epic so that you'd see the roadmap rather than seeing the whole deepness of the tree when you're kind of planning stuff of like when you're looking at an epic within the roadmap, right? You want to see like the boundaries when it is started and when it is planned to be ending and stuff like that. So when you're looking very, very deep into that, it adds a lot of complexity rather than looking at the immediate children and not all of the descendants of the epic. So it kind of makes, because like each child should be kind of embedded within its parents' boundaries time-wise, like it's kind of easier to plan for the immediate children than to plan for the and to see all of the descendants, because this tree can get pretty big if you were showing all of the children epics and then all of the issues and everything in that roadmap. So maybe it makes sense, but like as a first iteration or as something it does, to me at least, it does make sense to just in the roadmap at least to show only the immediate children of an epic and not the whole tree.
I agree in terms of complexity. I think it's easier. And one thing that I would like to know is related to the relationship of the tree and the roadmap is it correct to say that the roadmap consumes data from the tree to be built? I mean, like I imagine that when creating an epic, I would create a due date and things like that and start date.
Yeah.
Is it correct then that the roadmap will be based on this data and it's like static or well dynamically, but you don't change things from the roadmap view, but only from the epics view, right?
Yeah, that's correct, Walmar and Alexandru. I want to be careful to focus this discussion more on the design and the use cases, and let's come back to those technical considerations once we have the design we all agree on. And so that we're not like they are relevant, but like let's not limit our innovation on that. Let's limit our MVC on that, definitely, right? But not the amazing ideas.
Hey, can I ask a question? Just to kind of step back a little bit. Are we all on the same page that tree view should be built, and we're just trying to determine if it makes more sense to build it inside of issues or epics, or if it makes sense having its own standalone app, or if it makes sense having it built alongside roadmaps right now?
I think we agree on all those if those are and or statements, Donald. I would agree. Well, I mean, that means you can agree to anything, but I want them in all those places for like eventually. Well, I mean, I think it makes sense that to your initial question, does tree view make sense? I think yes, it's like the best view. That's why we have like Finder on Mac and Windows Explorer, whatever it's called on Windows. It's a great paradigm. We should use it.
So going back to what Pedro said, the thing that I'm least convinced by is what he touched on earlier, where you see your descendants. And I think I agree, it's completely a valuable thing to see. Just like we have the widgets right now, we have the epics, we have the issues. This is just combining them into one view. And I think it'll be great to see how they relate to each other. What I don't like is what he said, when you move something, you're seeing only it in a descendant view and you're not seeing what's happening above that. So I was talking to another designer, Andy, a couple of weeks ago, and we were trying to think of a way to see everything. Like, you've got your ancestors on the sidebar, but which is, I think, is also useful. Just it gives you sort of a North Star, like this is where I am, and now I can orient myself. But if you're dragging things around in the tree view, that's kind of a destructive action. You could move things into different epics kind of accidentally, which I really don't like, but I also don't want to introduce modals everywhere that's like, are you sure you want to do this? Because that'll get really annoying really quickly. I wanted to think about a way to, like, maybe there's you can't drag anything until you hit a button or something that's like show the entire tree, which is top to bottom. And that's the same view you'll see on every single epic in this epic view. Every time you want to edit it, you get to see the whole tree. You can't start dragging things if you're only seeing descendants, because you never know what you're going to do. So we were looking into that, where, yeah, you can't move until you see the entire tree. Does anyone have any ideas on that?
Yeah, I think that's better. I think that helps a little bit to place yourself. For me, that wasn't the main concern. I mean, that helps, yes. What I was saying is that, I mean, this is all hypothesizing something, but let's imagine that you want to actually move one issue from this epic into a completely different epic. And in that case, what you were just saying, maybe if only you see the entire tree, you would be able to move them. That makes sense. But also in terms of time, and coming back to what Victor was saying earlier, I think there's two parts to this, right? There's the part about you starting a project, breaking down into the different work pieces. And so you start creating one epic and then a sub epic, and then issues inside of that sub epic. And then you realize, oh, we need another epic here for another. And you start writing all of that down. And that's a way that a lot of teams work. And we need a really good interface that allows you to create issues and epics effortlessly. And not the way that we have today, where you have to go through different forms and then you create one, and you always have to create things and then link them instead of creating but that's a different thing. So you have the work breakdown structure, and then you have to plan it, right? And I think that's when things start to get a bit messy, is when you start moving things around that can potentially affect your planning in terms of effort and time and resources, etc. Yeah, I mean, we're having this discussion because I also don't know what is the right answer, right? Or else I would just comment in the issue with the suggestion. But I think it's somewhere in between, and what I'm saying is that if we try to have the work breakdown structure, for example, here in this tab bar, inside of the issue, inside of the epic, probably in the future we will have the same kind of tree near the roadmap, so you can see what you're affecting when you're changing the work breakdown structure and how that is affecting your planning in time. And so I think ultimately probably we'll be duplicating efforts. And okay, you can say, okay, but we can start in this direction. And we start by having these two tabs, for example, and then when we join everything in the roadmap, we deprecate these instead of having to maintain two separate views of the same thing. But what I'm arguing is that maybe we should study the problem more closely and
Drew, Could you give a concrete example of like changing something in the tree that would affect the timeline, for instance?
Sure. So in this example here of this epic, we have a start date and due date that are based on the milestones of the issues that are contained within. So you can see that in this case, both issues are using the same milestone. So it's through 3 weeks remaining, it's April, and that's why we have April here, right? And you can see when hovering that it's the same milestone that we're inheriting this due date. And in this case, we're also inheriting the start date because it's the only milestone here. And so when you have this concept of the milestones of the issues inside of an epic affect the dates of the epic and ultimately affect how it's viewed in comparison to other epics, when you move one of these issues somewhere else to another epic, or maybe once we have this inheritance of dates, probably even bubbling up to the ancestors, when you change something, you can immediately see that the dates will change. And you don't have visibility. Yeah.
You might move to an epic in a different milestone, for instance.
Yeah, and you don't know how that is going to affect maybe another area or another epic that you're not responsible for.
Right. So I mean, it's not that bad, Pedro, if we do it on this page, because you can see the effect on the epic that you have. And then if we have a tree view that also shows, for example, do our epics show start and end dates? If they don't, we might want to add them in the list view as well. And then so any changes you make in a tree view, you can see timelines reflected without a roadmap is what I'm contending. So that it's, of course, it's not as nice as a timeline roadmap view, but you can still see it here. And then the other benefit, I would say that, like, yes, it's duplicated, but I would say that we always should have a tree view in this context, because you can actually see the descriptions, right, of whatever you're looking at. So it's very valuable to see the description of this epic as you're moving things around, because you see all the metadata, you see the description, you see any potential comments, and so on and so forth. So I wouldn't rely on the roadmap view alone to have people do management of objects, is what I'm saying.
Yeah,
I think inline management here makes a lot of sense as well, as does the roadmap view too.
Yeah, I think it does. I'm just not sure if it's worth solving here first instead of the roadmap. We definitely need to have here some kind of work breakdown structure. I'm just really hesitant to have it here. And as I said, you end up affecting some things that you just don't know will be affected.
If you have it, I mean, if you have it in the roadmap view, my original point is that people are already using this view to create their work breakdown structures. And if you're having it in the roadmap view, that's great. Then people are going to be driven to the roadmap view to do the work breakdown structure. Or we're essentially saying that's where we're going to do that, right? And that, to me, that's a little bit harder to do. It's going to take a little bit more longer to iterate to get there. And so if you do it that way, I think to achieve that goal, it's less iterative. I'm not saying it's a big no, because it's also a more strategic move to have people pay more attention to timelines and to encourage higher adoption of that particular UI. So that's a riskier approach.
Is timelines, that's when I'm creating an issue or an epic, timeline isn't usually the first thing I'm thinking of. That's usually the last part for me. So to me, this makes a lot of sense. You get all the content in, and then you think about when you want to schedule it.
It could be the opposite, right? That like, I agree with you, Annabelle, with everything we do at GitLab. That is the case. I would say it's not the case in many organizations where you know, or like there's tools out there where you just drag something from one end to another end in the roadmap view to create something because I want this thing to be in the third quarter of blah, right? So I think there's usage of that to know about time beforehand. But I would agree with you, Annabelle, that I wouldn't want to do that, and I think that's a little bit more risky as the next step.
So, Annabelle, one of the things you said is that you were also not a fan of the solution for this issue. Can you explain a bit why?
Yeah, it's kind of what I already said. Just the tree view in particular. I quite like the tabs, and I like having the discussion, the tree, and then the roadmap of the epics that are already included on this epic. But the tree in particular was what I just, yeah, like what I said earlier, you can't see the ancestors, so you're sort of dragging and dropping things and doing potentially destructive actions, maybe by mistake. And you don't, like, if you dropped one and kind of in a random place, you wouldn't even know where you put it. You'd have to go and search through and look at the system notes to decide. So I liked the idea of creating some kind of view where you see the entire top to bottom tree and only being able to drag and drop in that view, because our other places where we drag, like issue boards and related, or, you know, the epic issues, those aren't destructive really. They just, you drag it and drop it into a different spot and it's fine. But this is moving something possibly into an entirely different epic.
Annabelle, don't you think it's similar from great that you brought up issue board, because I think it is analogous. When I think of issue board, there's a scope on the issue board. So there's a scoping from the board config, but there's also a scoping from the fact that it's part of a group or part of a project. So when I look in an epic tree thing, there's also a scoping. The scoping is the root because you're at the particular epic. And so assuming that you can only see your descendants, the scoping to me is the fact that you are who you are. You're the root, and then you look at your children. And so you can move your children around. And to me, that's enough context that I don't screw up enough. And so you mentioned, like, oh, if you made a mistake, we can, you know, use UI tricks to do that. Like when you move something around, it doesn't commit. But from a scoping perspective, I think that's totally fine, because yes, I don't know my ancestors and I don't know any impact that may have there, but I know all my children. I think that's good enough. And then if I do really care about my ancestors, then I would go to an ancestor epic and then do my dragging and dropping there. So that's why I think it's not that dangerous to see my ancestors when moving things around. Is that?
That's kind of what I was thinking when I started the design. But even on the one that Pedro had linked, the middle one, you can see there's a blue row there. I think this was one of the many mock-ups that I made that was sort of incomplete, but in that view, that blue row is supposed to be the issue that you're currently on, or the epic you're currently on. So I think this view is showing the entire tree top to bottom.
Right.
I still think it's more valuable to see the whole tree, and I don't know if, I think seeing the descendants only is good when you first click on that tab, because these are the children. But seeing a separate view where you see the entire tree, is there something?
Well, like,
is there a reason we shouldn't do that?
But you can
no. So I would be okay with.
Yeah,
go ahead,
you can always go to the toppest level epic kind of and see the whole tree from there.
You can. I find it weird that based on where you are in the tree, you'll see different things, and something about that just doesn't feel right. Like,
yeah, Annabelle, I'm not against your design. I'm just saying, yeah, like, if you think I think that's a small thing. I think the tree view is great. I think it's really hard to make a tree view look good. Like, so I'm struggling with that, because like the mockups are okay, but they don't look awesome. But I'm not against showing your parents. And so I would maybe say, like, you don't show your parents by default, then maybe you click a button and you see more, or I don't know, like maybe you do show all your ancestors. So I think that's fine. So if that's the only problem, to me, it's not a huge problem. It can be overcome.
that was my main issue with the design, and
Okay.
and this
Then
ugly
it's not an issue to me. If it's like if that's your biggest problem, then like let's work on this.
yeah, and this current mock-up that we're looking at isn't the most recent. The most recent is below that in the issue description. But this was going to be more like a collaboration when it was going to look more like that, which is what we already have. Just these are kind of a little bit less tall than what we are currently have.
Yeah, I'm fine with proceeding with this. Pedro, do you think this is okay? Should we really take a close look at if designers have time, design this and the roadmap view at the same time, and then do more of the research and so on and so forth. But I personally don't think we need to necessarily slow down and not work on this like in 11.10 or 11.11 or whenever we're working on it, and we can proceed. But that's my thought, Pedro.
I think so. What I would like to, it doesn't have to be a end all solution, and we don't have to figure everything out now. But I think we should have some, even if it's not very detailed, we should have some plan or idea or even rough sketch of how we could eventually, right now what Annabelle has suggested here and we've worked on is probably to have the tree and the roadmap inside of the epic, right? We've also agreed that maybe in the future we might have a tree next to the main roadmap view, right? And that's a separate thing. So that to me is enough detail of what the future could look like for the roadmap view. But in this view, what I would like to see more in, how should I say it? What's the term? In a more cohesive way is the fact that we have in the middle, we would have the tree. It's similar to what you were saying. We have the tree and we can show only the descendants. We can show the descendants and ascendants and the issues. But then we also have the tree here in the sidebar, or in this case would be the ascendants. And so if you want to navigate to the descendants, you use this. But then if you want to go to the ascendants, you use this part. So it's a completely different area. And then at the same time, I think we should have a strong opinion on what the let me open this up, what the main epic list is for, right? Because in this epic list, there is no tree. It's just basically a flat list of the epics. And we should have an opinion on what this view is for, and if it should always, in the near future, if it should stay as a flat list of epics, or if we eventually even transform this into a tree, if it makes sense for this to be like the root level of the tree, because I think it's a bit weird that if we stay with this flat view, but then if you want to see them in tree, you have to go inside of an epic. And then if you're inside of an epic, maybe you only see the children epics and issues, but not the ascendants. The ascendants are on this side. So what I'm trying to say is that these three parts, to me, look a bit disjointed. And I'd like to see some even rough idea of maybe how this can look in the future, even if we start first with this tab, which only shows the children. Does it make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think there was an issue somewhere to get rid of the list view of epics. I
really?
still like, yeah, right? Or am I imagining that?
I created that issue, yeah.
I don't know that it needs to be. I understand what you're saying. I'm trying to think if it. I like the list view a little bit, especially once I create an epic, because I like to see that it was created and there it is at the top. And sometimes I search by different criteria. And I like that they're all at the same level. So if there's one deeply nested, it might be a little harder to find, and I guess we'd have to get rid of all of our filtering options at the top, which might also be useful, but I'm sorry, that's really loud. It might be worth opening an issue to look into though.
I think, Annabelle, I think what Pedro, or this is what I'm hearing from you, Pedro, is just how these designs come together, right? Because there is a lot of duplication and use cases. So I agree, if at least there's 2 use cases I can think of, right? Just creating work breakdown structure because you have an idea of how you want to divide up work, and then you also have the other use case of not just dividing up work, but how dividing up work impacts timelines. And so if we have coherent designs that address both those use cases, that would be great to document and have as we iterate toward.
Yeah, so let me give an example. You start with no epics, right? And now you want to start your work breakdown structure. The first thing you need to do is to create an epic, and then you can start that work breakdown structure, right? You cannot do that right now from this view. And again, this is just me exploring. What if this view, the epic list, it not only allows you to have a flat list, but maybe by default or not, you can toggle this view and see it in tree, right? And so when you come here for the first time, in the same way that you can type search results and you type in for the filters and you immediately start building your query, you could do the same to create epics, right? Mm-hmm. And you could either go the route that we have right now, which is to create a new epic, and then you go to the page and you start filling the details of the epic, or you just start saying new epic with title. I mean, this is verbose, or this is too conversational, but have an interface that allows you to just type out the structure as you're talking with your team or with your client, and you start seeing the structure building up here. Instead of having to create an epic, go inside of the epic, and then create the structure by itself. That's probably a separate thing. What I'm a bit worried is that we don't have, again, it doesn't need to be definitive vision, but have some idea of how we can bring all of this together. This list view, the descendants with the tree, and also the ascendants here on the sidebar. Because this, to me, feels like we could end up in the near future with a very disjointed experience, which is fine. That's GitLab, right? We ship things, and in certain points in time, things feel a bit disjointed, but then they feel good again. But I'm not seeing that good now, right? And even if it's a rough sketch, I feel like we have enough information to be able to have that vision, essentially. Or you don't think so, Annabelle?
No, I think that's a really good idea. I never thought about the list view like that, so I think that would be really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I know that we here in the sidebar, this is where, for example, in issues, we have the epic name. But other than that, we don't have, we have the milestone. But the milestone is not necessarily a parent container of the issue. The epic is a parent container of the issue. And I don't know if having it here in the sidebar is, and which we then ported this this behavior to the epic itself with the ancestor epics. I don't know if this is also limiting us to have a good experience when we have the tree. So maybe try to join this and move it away from the sidebar to actually have it here with the tree, and see how also what plans we might have for the list view.
But do you think this not having this vision of how it will connect in the future blocks us to start developing this feature?
No, not at all. I don't think it blocks us from developing the feature. I mean, I think we should, from the conversation that we're having, I'm more certain about the idea that it's here. I just feel like this is an exercise that we can do in parallel as we develop this, because I think we should work at both levels, right? We should work at a holistic level in a very rough way, seeing, oh, this can go in this direction, but at the same time be very precise and detailed on what the next step is. And the next step in this situation is to view the epics inside of an epic. Right now we have this area, but it's just the children, the direct children. You don't see other than that. And then you have the ancestors here in the sidebar. So the tree view makes sense to have there in the epic. I just want us to also think in a holistic view of what's coming next. Yeah.
Have we discussed other way, or is there a use case for a child that needs multiple parents? So say in the OKR way of working, we've got an OKR, so objectives as the parent, the parent, and then we've got key results, and then we have issues tied to those key results. But if those issues are tied into multiple objectives, have we thought about that at all, or is that a use case that maybe we have found that is not an actual use case?
It's something that I think at least one person has asked for. Maybe I think Kushal's asked for something. No, Kushal's for something else. But we purposely designed. We were more conservative in our design because we can go in one direction, and the direction that we can go is to be more broad. And so, so Pedro, Annabelle, and everybody jump in. But we went with our current way of working so that the designs are simpler, we can make certain assumptions. And I like the current design, and I don't think there's been strong enough feedback to warrant relaxing it right now. So I think OKR that's a great one to do it. And so the negatives is, I would say that the greatest negative is if we intend to use Epic to represent work breakdown structure, then scope is law of conservation of scope, essentially, right? Because if you have multiple parents, then where do you put your scope into? And then if we start doing things like adding up story points, or we call them weights in GitLab, then things get really weird. So right now, this is the current design. I like the current design. I don't see a compelling case to loosen that constraint yet, but I think we should be open to it when the time comes.
Yeah, and if a company works that way, they can probably use labels to accomplish what they want to do there.
That's definitely a workaround. I mean, labels is a workaround for everything.
Yeah, I've noticed.
Yeah, Alexis, I'm also curious about what, as a person that has a fresh pair of eyes and has never worked with this, or I believe you haven't touched on this yet. What are your thoughts about this issue and the conversation that we're having?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with both of you. Victor said something about like, oh, if you want to see the whole relationship, you could just go to another epic, like go to the ancestor, I guess. And I'm like, well, maybe we just allow people to do that more easily. Like, I think that was Annabelle's point. And then also I had that same thought, like, okay, why can't I just toggle between like a backlog or like just a list of epics and then also see the whole tree? I just want to see the entire relationship. That makes sense to me. I'm still trying to like figure out exactly what all these things mean. But I mean, as someone who hasn't used this before, really, it is, I agree with you, kind of confusing. Like there's all these like list views and like different views that are trying to like, to me, as a novice user, I'm like, well, what exactly are they trying to tell me? Is it competing information? Is it, a few different parts of the same information? Like what exactly am I looking at? Like,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It is, yeah, it's hard to get the whole story, I feel like. So I don't know if this is going to solve it right away, but yeah. I think, yeah. I think you need more context, right? Like, and I do agree. I like that, the idea of having it in that like backlog or list view at the very beginning. Like, I think in general, like you said though, Pedro, it's like more research. We kind of are we understanding the user's journey totally right now? Like that's kind of where I am struggling, and I don't know if everyone is, but it's like, what are the touch points here? That's what I'm interested in.
I mean, we understand our use case pretty well. That's us at GitLab, and yeah, I think maybe some research with customers and could help, and having also the designers in direct contact with customers, asking those questions, could lead to open up to more. I mean, what's similar to what Donald was saying. Oh, have we looked at all possibilities and all different? Are we? I think maybe Donald, what you were saying is, are we thinking outside of the box? What are the things we are not looking at that are just next to us? And maybe that could help uncover exactly what you were just saying. For example, the list view of epics. Do people want to immediately start doing the work breakdown structure from that screen instead of having to create an epic? I mean, this is just me assuming. I mean, I would love to be able to do that, but that's me. I don't know if customers and other users would love to. And that's, I think, when we need to do some research. But again, I know we need to move fast, and I think the tree that Annabelle designed, or at least the concept, it's something that eventually we will have to do. It makes sense, or else people would always be jumping from epic to epic to understand what's inside of that epic. So yeah, I'm curious to see how some of the issues will be solved. And I'm sure that because we use it a lot, we will be the first people to have some headaches with the tree, and that's where iteration comes in, and we start fixing that. So yeah, nonetheless, I think this discussion was important. I don't know if anyone else wants to bring up anything. If so, please interrupt me. I think that I can, so for these ideas that I was talking about, I don't know, Victor, do we have any issues for this? The tree viewing the epic list and having a faster way to detail the work breakdown structure?
No, we do not.
Okay, cool. I can create them.
Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, it was great to see everyone here in this call and contributing with their thoughts. So thank you so much, Valmir, Alexander, Alexis, Donald, Annabelle, and Victor. And I'll upload this to GitLab Unfiltered, unless anyone wants isn't
No,
against
that's great
that.
for me. I am not against that.
Cool. Thank you so much. It was great seeing you. Bye-bye.